Hi, everybody. It's Michelle Jackson, and I am here tonight with another amazing writer. Wow, how do I get started? So, Ashley M. Jones is the Poet Laureate for the state of Alabama. She is the first African American to earn this position, as well as the youngest poet to ever have this position at 31 years old. She is here with us tonight to talk about her work, to talk about her new role with the state of Alabama, what it means. She's also going to talk to us about growing up in Alabama. And I'm so excited because we are both from the same area. I'm from Fairfield, Alabama. She's from Birmingham, Alabama. And Fairfield is just a small town right outside of Birmingham. So we grew up probably going into the same places and enjoying the same sites. And that means that we're both two Southern writers here. We're going to talk all about writing. We're going to bring on the screen, but before we do that, I wanted to ask you to do me a couple of favors. One, if you are watching us on YouTube or Facebook, please drop us a comment so we'll know you're there. Also, if you're on Facebook and you want a shareable version of this particular interview, do me a couple of favors. Go to author Michelle D. Jackson, find the post for this live stream and share it on your page so that we can optimize the number of people who will be watching. You can always drop questions in the comment area. We're welcoming those questions and we will definitely answer them as quickly as we can. However, we're going to spend the next hour just talking to Ashley and learning about what she's doing, why she's doing it, what's driving her, what's making all this important. And gosh, I'm just so happy to have another Alabama writer here to talk to the Black Writers Workspace community. Hi, Ashley. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Michelle?
I am great. Once again, thank you so much for being with us here at the Black Writers Workspace. What we have is a community of Black writers and avid readers who are dedicated to making sure that Black literature moves forward in the right way. We bring on people, we talk to you about what you're doing, how you can inspire us to continue to write. We are just a great community of writers who are committed to making sure that we can continue to write and continue to have an audience. And so we see someone like you and we get all excited. I know I'm excited. I don't know about nobody else. I'm excited because you are a great representation of what this community is all about. Someone who is African American, who is using the written word to tell your story, to share your passions, and who's making sure that Black literature continues to have a prominent place in our past and in our history, in our future, because that's how we are telling the stories of our ancestors. And one day someone will be reading about all of our works. And so that's a very, very important thing to us. So Ashley, I've got a long bio on you. I know a lot about you. I've been doing my homework. You're from right outside of the city where I'm from, which is Fairfield, Alabama. You're from Birmingham, Alabama. We have a lot in common there. When you are a Alabama writer as an African American, there is an amazing story to tell. And I'm so profound, it's so unique that you're 31 years old because you're going to see the world differently than I do at 47. But nonetheless, I'm sure we have crossed paths in many ways and experienced some of the same things. So tell us about yourself and tell us about your work.
Well, this is always the hardest question for me to tell people about myself, because to me, I just want to answer, I'm Ashley, and that be it, but as you said, I am from Birmingham, born and raised here, and I am a poet. I've been writing since I was 7 years old, and I've been creative probably since I was 3, since I knew how to write and read. And I work here in Birmingham. I'm a teacher. I teach at the high school level, the undergraduate level, and at the graduate school level as well. I run a nonprofit, the Magic City Poetry Festival. I am involved with PEN America and their Across America chapters. So I co-direct the Birmingham chapter. What else? I love tap dance, and I love Alabama.
Wow. For someone who's from the town that I'm from, I was really shocked when I saw your face show up as the new poet laureate. I'm not going to lie about that.
Yeah.
I did my homework to see who are some of the past poet laureates for the state of Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you are the first African American and the youngest. And I must admit, I looked at that list and I had no idea who any of them were.
Oh, no.
Since 1930, the state has been appointing someone to be the poet laureate for the state. I had no idea that this position even exists for the state, because it has never been something that has come my way or something that people in my circle have talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, I want you to explain a little bit more about what is a poet laureate and what will you do for the state of state of Alabama, right before we get into our conversation about some of the other parts that I would love to discuss with you.
Yeah, so a poet laureate is basically an ambassador for poetry for whatever constituency they represent. So there's, of course, the National Poet Laureate, who right now is Joy Harjo, our first Native American poet laureate for our nation. And they are state level, there's sometimes city level, county, maybe there's a poet laureate for a library system. There's lots of different ways you can be a poet laureate. And basically what the job of a poet laureate is to represent poetry and to bring it to people. So specifically, that means that I will do library visits, maybe partner with different organizations to put on poetry programs, do readings. I'm specifically hoping to touch every single region and every age group with poetry programs that are virtual and in person. And I also want to help create or keep creating spaces for poets and writers to be paid for their work. We've done a lot of that with the Magic City Poetry Festival and even with some other organizations I'm involved with, just making sure that we always attach a value to art, because as we know, as writers, sometimes there's not a monetary value attached to it. And what we do is work and it is labor. So I'm hoping during my 4 years to do a lot of that within the state, but also to continue to shine a light on what we're doing here to the rest of the nation and maybe even to the world at large.
That's excellent. How did you get selected to be the poet laureate?
So it's a pretty long process, actually. Of course, before anybody even wants to nominate you, you have to have done something. So I spent a long time working hard. I know I'm only 31, but I've been at this for a super long time, just writing books and being involved in the community. So once I sort of made a name for myself, then people from the community can submit nomination packets to the Alabama Writers Conclave or Cooperative. We changed our name recently, the AWC. They submit those nomination packets, and in that packet, there are letters of support and also a sample of my work. That nomination packet, all those packets went to a committee, and the committee was comprised of writers and professionals from across the state. And that committee deliberated over, I believe there were 4 nominees for this round. And then I was selected as the official nominee. Then I went before the membership of the AWC to be voted in as the official selection. And right now I'm waiting for a date from the governor's office for when I'll be officially commissioned down in Montgomery.
That's excellent. The whole process and understanding how it works. Just knowing that we now, as a state, have an African American poet laureate speaks volumes to progress, because we know that the state of Alabama has had a very, very turbulent history and continues to do so. However, when young Black girls see your face, they're going to know that they can do it. And if I, as a young person at Fairfield High School, would have seen a Black poet laureate for the state, that may have changed how I saw or how I envisioned my writing career to be. Because I don't know about you, it sounds like you decided you wanted to be a poet and you went in that direction. But for me, I came out of public housing. I always wanted to be a writer. I was dragging around a typewriter from the age of 7 8 years old, and always pecking away at something. But I didn't know how to make that transition because I didn't have the mentors around me. I did have a teacher who thought I was really good at writing, and she was able to get me into a writing workshop at the University of Alabama. And I eventually went there, graduated, did a lot of writing, and now I've published 2 books. But however, seeing someone like you, I'm hoping, and I know this is going to be the case, that other young girls in and out of Alabama will know that they can do it. And that's what's so tremendous about your accomplishments. So you have written 3 books of poetry, and you have won countless awards. I want to read some of those because she's been very modest, which is why I asked that question. Introduce yourself. People always tell the sweet things, and I'm like, I have to pull my paper out on you, girl. You hold an MFA in poetry from Florida University, Florida International University. You're the author of Magic City Gospel, Dark Thing, and Reparations Now, and we're going to talk about those books. Your poetry has won awards, including the Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, the Silver Medal, and the Independent Publishers Book Awards, the Lena-Miles Wever Todd Prize for Poetry, a Literature Fellowship from the Alabama State Council on the Arts. Okay, yeah, okay. You've only done a couple of things, girl. No, you've done a lot, and I love that. And I love that. And you've done so much in trying to help other people in this literary world. So we're going to talk a little bit about what drove you to become a poet. When did you know you wanted to be a poet? And what really inspired it? And what happened next? I mean, what was that moment? Was like, whether you were 6, 7, or 8 years old, and then what did you do next in order to make your dreams come true?
Well, I feel like I've told this story so much in the past 2 weeks, so hopefully everyone who hears it is not just sick and tired of hearing me say this story. I love telling it personally. But, so I was 7 when I first decided that I wanted to be a poet. I was already really into reading and writing and creating because my parents, that's what they had us to do when we were at home. Before we went to school, we learned how to read and write around the age of 3, each of us. There's four Jones siblings. I should start there. And all of us are artsy. And so, when I was really, really young, that was what I did for fun, was write and read and paint and sing songs and dance around the house and all that kind of stuff. So I was already set up for creativity. And so when I started school, I attended Epic Elementary School on the south side of Birmingham. And at that school, they had really amazing, curriculum. And part of that curriculum for all the grade levels had to do with creation. So for the first few years of school, I was always creating books. And I used to write little mysteries or fictional stories. But it was in 2nd grade when I had an assignment from a teacher to memorize something and then recite that something at school. And so I happened to be reading the book Honey, I Love by Eloise Greenfield, who, of course, we know she recently passed away, unfortunately, but she was an amazing children's book author. And this book is a book for children. It's a poetry book, and all of the poems deal with Blackness, which was so amazing to me because, as you know, there's not always Black stories told, and certainly when you're young, and back then it was, I guess, 97 when I was 7 years old, there wasn't a lot there. They had maybe the Addie books from American Girl and maybe a few other Black stories, but there was not an overflowing well of Blackness back then. So I got this book from the library, read it, and I loved the poem Harriet Tubman. So that's what I chose to recite. So my mom came and got me dressed up as Harriet Tubman. And back then I still had my tonsils and my adenoids, and they were swollen. So I was always stuffy and phlegmy and nasally. So I always kind of hated the sound of my own voice. But that day I was really excited. So I got up in front of class and I recited the poem, which begins, Harriet Tubman didn't take no stuff, wasn't scared of nothing neither, didn't come in this world to be no slave, and wasn't going to stay one either. And it goes on a little bit more. And so I remember reciting it and not feeling that same sort of, oh, I hate my voice, kind of uncomfortable feeling. I just felt powerful and excited and just full of an energy I hadn't really felt before. And I felt so Black in that moment. Growing up, I have always been a proper speaking person, and I think you know what I mean. And I always wanted to have that swing of language that I heard my parents, my grandparents, my grandmothers, I should say, and my aunts and uncles have. And when I said that poem, I was like, man, I have it. It's in me somewhere, that spirit. So after that day, I took what was my spy journal. I had been reading Harriet the Spy back then too. I was really obsessed. So I would walk around spying on my family like a creepy little, writing person would. But I took that notebook and I started writing poems in it. And those poems are very interesting. I read them a few years ago, and they're all very angsty, very just tortured, like, oh, no one understands me. Even though I was just 7, I was already a tortured writer at that time. That's how it started. And I just kept writing. And I was really fortunate to be able to attend the School of Fine Arts from 7th to 12th grade. And that's what really gave me the foundation to know the technical side of writing. And I just kept going from there.
But it seems like your writing has become more of activism in many ways. And was there a point where you transitioned from the angry, starving 7-year-old artist on the streets of New York to that person who knew that if you are going to write and be in a city like Birmingham with the history of the state of Alabama, that it had to have some form of activism in it? Was there a point where you knew you needed to make that transition?
Yeah, and actually, people have been asking me that over the past 2 weeks, and I'm starting to remember that even before, like, I'll say it this way, I had to come back to that feeling. I believe I started with that feeling as a young person, and then I abandoned that feeling, and I'll explain why in a moment. But in some of those older those books that I made as a kid, the little poetry books that I made, there's poems about racism, and one I remember so vividly called Colors, and I was so proud of it. It rhymed, and it talked all about Black history, and I took it to my grandma's house, and she hung it up on her wall, and it was awesome. But that's where I began, was talking about those issues, but I moved away from it really when I started my formal education. And unfortunately, so often when we go to get our education, that's when we unlearn our own pride in our own people, and we unlearn our interest in representing ourselves as proudly Black, because often we are the only one there, or our professors only show us works by white writers, or our classmates make comments. I'll never forget, I was in the 8th grade and I wrote a poem about Black history, and it had a refrain, because I was really into rhyme back then. I'm into it now, but back then I was heavy into rhyme. And the refrain was, the boombox booms loud in my ear, and the streets shake fiercely when I'm near. And I would go into all these different Black history moments from slavery to the present. It was a very long poem, and I was so proud to read it, because we had readings each year at ASPA. And when I finished the reading, some of my classmates came up to me and they were laughing, and they said, "We didn't know you could rap. That was so funny." And I just said to myself, okay, I'm done then. Nobody understands this. I'm never going to try this again. And so from maybe 8th grade to maybe middle of senior year, I did not write about Blackness at all. I tried to write about everything else. I would look at what the other kids wrote and try to do what they did, just so I could feel more normal, so to speak. And I really formally made the transition back. I mean, I kind of dabbled in senior year and through college, but I really, really committed in graduate school when I moved away from Alabama. And I just found myself so homesick that all I could do was write about my home and the history. And I really dove into what I knew was my interest all along. My professors gave us all the space to be exactly who we were. And they supported us in whatever our specific goals were. There was not the expectation that you would write like everyone else. Which was amazing. I know that's not always the case in graduate school, but I am so grateful that that was my experience, because I was able to really turn back to that activism and history telling type of poetry that I write to this day.
I love that you use the word unlearn, because I think that is something that we often do, is we unlearn and we unappreciate our Blackness as we move into a world that is, that tells us to assimilate and, as people say, code, what is it?
Code switching.
Code switching, which, it's so funny. I hear that was as standard as breathing in the corporate world when I was in it. Okay.
Right.
So I think that, there's something there about the unlearningness of Blackness as an artist that you do come back to. It almost drags you back. And I must admit, I went through that. I went to the University of Alabama. I come from a community that was all Black. And when I say all Black, there were probably 3 white teachers at Fairfield, and maybe 3 or 4 white students at Fairfield. And I may be wrong, but trust me, it wasn't any more than 10. I can promise you that. And so we read all the classics. Of course, we read what we were taught to write, to read, Shakespeare and things like that. But we read Maya and Alice Walker, and it was drilled into us. And then I grew up across the street from Miles College. So
yeah, wow.
That whole experience was, it was always say it's kind of the blacker than black experience. And then here I go off to the University of Alabama. And it was a culture shock for me. It was like Confederate flags hanging out of windows, and I'm the only class. This is early 90s. So, don't get me wrong. I think I love my degree. I think I learned a great deal. It taught me to prepare myself for what this world was going to be about. But I did have to come back to me. I had to come back to a world of, appreciating and wanting to fight. Because that's what the readings did for me. Not fight physically, but fight with my words, to be an activist. And I feel like I'm finally back in that place. So I'm glad to hear you talk about unlearning that Blackness and then coming back to it, because that is essential. And we as artists have to learn how to embrace that. Right. Now, was there someone who gave you, I know you say your college professors kind of gave you that permission in a way to just explore, but your work is very dynamic in that it deals with the history and it connects us all to that history. You use a lot of pop culture, you connect it and fuse it into your childhood. You do a lot of things that are tremendous in that work. Talk to us about your poetry style. Is there a writer that you envy and has helped to influence your work? But what really kind of draws the words out of you in that capacity, the way you put pen to paper?
Well, that's a good question. I have two writers that I'll try to talk about without rambling for too long about it. I can tend to go off on a tangent. I'm a Leo. We have so many words to give. But the first, I think, writer that I want to talk about is Rita Dove. When I mentioned earlier that I had a brief return to writing about Blackness in my senior year of high school, it was Rita Dove who brought me there. I don't remember who gave me this book or if I found it and bought it myself, but I had a selected works of Rita Dove that I carried around with me everywhere that senior year. I marked it up. I had all these notes, all these bookmarks. It was the only book I read. I didn't read any other books really that whole year. And I try to be an avid reader. Being a teacher kind of kills that a little bit because you're just reading student work all the time. But back then I was reading so many books, but that year I just kept rereading Rita Dove's book. And that year I had to also write a senior thesis, and I modeled my thesis after her book, Thomas and Beulah, which is sort of a novel in verse about a pair of lovers, Thomas and Beulah, and their life together. And they're Black, and the poems feel very Black as well. And I felt like she gave me some permission during that year to, for one, come into poetry, because really for most of my high school career, I was writing fiction. Even though poetry was the thing that excited me way back when I was 7 years old, as I mentioned, I sort of veered away to try to assimilate. So I was writing a lot of fiction. But in my senior year, I said, no, I really want to try to get back to poetry. And she opened that door for me. And then when I got to college, I had to do a lot of self-study to find Black poets. Because, I mean, and no disrespect to any of my teachers, but again, the well is often not very full of Black writers. And so I found Lucille Clifton, who has remained my patron saint of poetry. She is everything to me, on the page and in spirit. I'd never met her in person, but I do believe I met her spirit, which is a story I can tell if you would like me to, but I'll skip it for now. But with her, she really opened me up to how to use words to their best ability. And what I mean by that is her poems are often very small. They're short. The lines are not very long, but she says so much in that small space. And it's not just, it's not flat. There's a lot of layers to her work. She has not abandoned any of the, trappings of poetry, the figurative language. It's all there, but she's boom, in there, out of there, and it's accessible. It's not this puzzle. I've always hated, and I was an English major, so like I can decipher it, but I hate when writers are intentionally confusing or hiding all their meaning. Because to me, art is a conversation. So if I'm not trying to be clear to you, why am I talking at all? So Clifton really instructed me in those ways, and she still is. And even just her way. And again, I didn't know her in person, but I've had the opportunity to talk with her daughters and develop a relationship with them. And just hearing about the kind of person that she was, I'm not surprised because it's in her work. She was generous and kind and patient and brilliant and funny, and gave people permission to just be, to be who they are. And so I hope that my work is doing that as well. It's inviting people in. It has the layers for those who need the layers, and it has meaning for those who don't need to see all those layers. I want there to be room for everybody in my work and in all poetry, honestly. That's like my life's mission, to make poetry accessible for every single person.
I love that. There are a lot of poets on the page. I read a lot of poetry, buy a lot of books from the writers on the page. I love poetry, but I must admit that I didn't, although I know everyone that you just named, it wasn't something that I was exposed to repeatedly. And that's what bothers me a bit about poetry. There were a small amount of African-American writers that we all kind of gravitate towards. And there were a few poets, Black poets that we gravitated towards, but it wasn't like a repeat exposure. And so I think it's important that we, when you talk about Clifton and Dove, that we continue to talk to our young people about them, giving them the books, having them to recite those poems. The poetry of the past, just like poetry of the present, it really does instill so much beauty in all of us. I write a little bit of poetry. I enjoy writing poetry. But it's something I don't have all the skills, the techniques of the way I would love to. So this is something that someone said to me a couple of interviews ago. They said that I was a Southern writer, and have you heard that term? And when I heard it, I kind of took a step back because the first person that came to mind was Harper Lee, and it wasn't the tons of brilliant Black writers that came out of the South. It was someone who had been, once again, I was repeatedly exposed to in those English classes. And that's who I thought about. And I'm like, I never thought about myself as a Southern writer, but I am a Southern writer, and you are as well. And so my next question for you has to do with your NPR interview. I think it was just a couple of days ago. I may be wrong, but you made a comment that you have a long-standing love-hate relationship with Alabama and your hometown of Birmingham. In researching your work, I noticed that there was this consistent theme where people really paid attention to the fact that you were, in your work, reckoning with history. Right. You are reckoning with history. And as an Alabama girl, like I am, you're constantly having to reckon with that history because the history is in your face. I live in New Orleans now. I'm a military wife, so I'm not just a nomad, but I've lived in New Orleans now. I lived in Atlanta, Baltimore, near the DC area, in Pittsburgh. And when I go somewhere and I say I'm from Alabama, there is always that look of, we're so sorry that you came from such a rough, racist place. So we're constantly having to reckon with history. Right. Talk to all of us a little bit about your reckoning and why you made the comment that you have this love-hate relationship, and why so many of us still have that bittersweet taste in our mouth when it comes to being from a state with such a harsh, hard history when it comes to racism, but also being from a place that still holds a great deal of beauty for many of us, because of our relationship to the cities and into the community as a whole.
Yeah. So when you just said that people would kind of say, "Oh, I'm sorry," that experience is very familiar to me as well. Whenever I would go out on tour before the pandemic, obviously, and people don't really always know where I'm coming from because I don't have a really thick accent or anything, which you don't either. So I'm sure it's the same kind of, oh, Alabama. But people would say things like, oh, I'm so sorry, just like you said. And are you okay? And, I would always say, I'm okay if you're okay, because we live in the same country. I mean, I don't know what you mean,
Exactly.
It's the same place. There's no place in this country that I can step one toe and it's not going to be the same stuff going on. So that's been something that I have recently started to try to push back on. When I was younger, however, I didn't really have the tools to understand that I was not on an island of Alabama where all the bad stuff lived. Because growing up here, you're almost conditioned to be ashamed of where you're from. And I think that our state is still dealing with some of that self-hatred and just feelings of inadequacy in general. But I do think there's a lot of us now who have returned, who are or who are expats like yourself, and who are trying to spread the gospel, as they say, about what actually does go on here in Alabama. And I mean, of course, there's a very violent history here. Nobody can deny that. But by that same token, the violent history extends beyond our borders. And on the flip side, there's also a history of activism and of carrying the country here in the South. If we go all the way back to slavery, we know that the economy was built by slave labor. And so the South literally fed the rest of the nation. Obviously, slavery was terrible, but the point stands, the South was important. If you go forward to civil rights, of course, we had a lot going on here that was a blueprint for our country on how to fight, these horrible laws that we had. And so again, there we are, meaning so much to the country, and yet people still think this is just the scourge of the earth, And so then we internalize that as well and think, oh, this is a terrible place. And then being a Black person from the South, you don't want anybody to think that you're, that you deserve that. Oh no, are you okay? You're like, no, I'm good. I'm fine. I've gotten past all of that, So it becomes difficult. But in my poetry, I feel like I'm able to really think through the history, for one, because I really think you can't love a place if you don't point out what happened, with that place. The fact that I say I love Alabama is not me saying I sure love that we, had all these horrible laws on the books. Absolutely not. It's saying this place means something to me. This is my home. My people are from here. There's so much beauty, as you said, here. So much amazing art. The nature here is amazing. The food here is amazing. This is a great place. We just need to actually confront what happened and confront what is happening now still, and I think that speaks to the country as well. The fact that most people won't admit that Alabama is just like their state speaks to this desire to not actually deal with issues that we face.
Well said. And I will say this as well, is that, I'm a hometown. That is my hometown. There's a great level of respect for the place that we call home. And that's for whether we're from a good place or a place that's perceived to be great or good, or if it's for someone at a place like Birmingham or Alabama who has such a tainted history. However, I think we both can say that we've had great memories in this city, and the best way to propel the city forward is to let or allow and celebrate people like you who's out there spreading the good news, but also being extremely realistic about the fact that there are issues that need to be addressed in the state of Alabama, but there are issues to be addressed across the country. One thing that gave me a lot of pride in being from Alabama is moving around and realizing that we as a community, as a state, has had to face racism.
Right.
No one can deny. We can't sit back and deny that there isn't racism in the state of Alabama. The history books tell it over and over and over. But when you go to some of these states that are in these cities that are in the North, that are in the Midwest, and I say this and I say it comedically sometimes, but it almost feels like the civil rights movement hadn't gotten there into some of these places yet. I lived in Pittsburgh for 3 years or 4 years. I've never lived in a more segregated city in my life. And so what that did for me was it made me say, oh, we're strong in Alabama. we are forcing everyone to take a look at this racism. We're going to deal with it. We've been dealing with it in front of the national and the international eye for a very, very long time. But there are still cities that are suffering in thinking that we're better than Alabama, we're better than Birmingham, because we're not in the South. We don't have this amazing, this hard, history. But they are also not dealing with the racism, the redlining, the marginalization of people of color. They're not dealing and facing those issues because they don't think those things really can impact them.
Right.
So I love that you are dealing with race. We're dealing with racism. We're being honest, that you're being very honest about that love-hate relationship, because it is that. Trust me, it is a love-hate relationship. Love the beauty, love the family history. But I have had people to approach me and say things to me about growing up in Alabama. Oh, we didn't know that you could do X. It's like they think we're on horse and buggies in Alabama. It is a bizarre thing. But then I'll hear someone who will say to me, I've been to Birmingham and it's beautiful. I've been to places all over Alabama and I love it. You guys live nice. You have great food. You have great this, that, and other. So I don't want everybody to get to be fooled about the state of Alabama. There is definitely some good things to look at, but there are also some hard things to look at as well. Let's talk a little bit about the future of poetry. And we do have a couple of comments coming in, people saying hello, sounds about right, congratulations. I know more of those are going to come in. So if you're out there and you want to drop your comments, please do. If you have any questions for Ashley, be sure to ask us those in the comment area. Ashley, I'm looking at one of your poems and I love the way it flows. I know you're going to do a little reading for us later. But I'm looking at this poem that I saw, and it says, "This evening in Birmingham, when I'm meeting a friend for fried chicken poetry and prostrate before God on a piece of cardboard box in the back alley, beside you, there's a dumpster whispering styrofoam and onion skins. The shells of dead cockroaches bend and crackle under your knee. Even they pray." Talk to me about that.
So that poem, which I'm trying to flip to in that book, because I want to be able to say its name, but of course I'm not going to find it immediately. People think I've memorized all the pages in my books. Not true.
No, not true.
At all.
It's behind Al's Mediterranean and American food.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So that poem I wrote, I was meeting my friend Emmett Crystalier at Al's one summer afternoon, and we happened to see one of the workers go behind the dumpster to do salat or do the daily prayers in the Muslim faith. And I was just so struck, by seeing such a public prayer in a place that most would say like is not fit for praying, a dumpster, But it made me think about how God really does exist in every single thing and in every single place. And I had to somehow capture that in a poem because it was just an unforgettable moment and image to see. So yeah, I have not thought about that poem in many years. My goodness.
I love that. I thought it was well written. I've read a lot of your poetry and I'm just taken back by it. So congratulations on that. And in thinking about poets, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the future of poetry for those poets out there. There are a couple of things that you've already said that I'm hoping some of the writers on the page will pay close attention to. Most of our writers are independent or new writers. And so, now writing is so different. We can self-publish, we can put our work out there in the world. However, we're really big on trying to encourage our writers to do it the right way, follow the right technique, learn about poetry, how to write it, how to lay it out, and, getting it edited and making sure that it is meaningful. That's very important to you. But you talked about, just the idea of the flow of how you write. And those are some of the key things that we're hoping that the people out there that are listening will pay attention to. But you also talked a great deal about your research and your love of other poets.
Mhm.
And that is a very big piece to being a good writer, is being to appreciate the craft as a whole. And with that said, I found another piece that you wrote.
Uh-oh.
I'm not going to read it all, but you wrote a piece for CNN Opinion about 22-year-old National Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman and her riveting introduction to the world during the reading of her masterpiece, The Hill We Climb, and that was during the Biden inauguration. You started your piece off by reciting a quote from writer Audre Lorde, which said, "Poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action." As I read the line, "the quality of light," I envisioned Gorman standing at the podium in her bright yellow coat and her red crown. That vision will forever be with me, is seeing her do that. My question for you is, how did Gorman's presence and her poetic craft reinforce to you that the world desperately needs to hear more from Black female poets?
Yeah, I was so excited to first of all hear that there was going to be a poem read again at the inauguration, because we know what happened with the last president. There was no light, there was no art, there was no
Mhm.
love of any kind. It was just horrible. So I was very excited to see that return. And when we learned that it was going to be a Black woman doing the poem, that was even better, because I mean, I truly believe Black women should just do everything all the time. We do everything so well, you know. um, but to see her there being so young, also, that was very, very important. And of course, we know that it was a political appearance, so that comes with its own issues. But for the rest of us who are not, government agents, we were very excited to see someone so young taking on this job and showing the world that young people's voices are so important. I teach primarily high school students, and I mean, sometimes I think we should just let them run things for a little while, because they have such fresh ideas and just a way of looking at the world that's not as jaded as the rest of us, frankly. And they often feel, my students, even though they go to an art school, sometimes they'll feel like, oh, nobody cares what I'm writing. I'm just an amateur. But I try to tell them, if you're writing a poem ever, you are a poet already. There's nothing you need to do to become a poet. If just write the poem, you are one. And everything that you write, I tell them, is complete already. Yes, we can do workshop, we can do this, that, and the other, but whatever is given to you, because I do believe it is a gift, that's already complete. And so they were able to sort of see through Amanda Gorman that they could mean something, to the world, because here she was holding this amazing audience in front of this huge audience, reciting her poem so beautifully. And I also think it was amazing just to see, as a poet, to see someone reading a poem, having written a poem for this occasion. People don't understand how difficult it is to write a poem when somebody asks you to do it for a special occasion. It's not like you're not a factory that's just like, okay, cool, here's your inauguration piece, boom. There's so many moving parts to it. And to have to represent a whole presidency, like, that's a huge amount of pressure. And she maybe had to hide some of her opinions in her poem, because she couldn't, stand up there and say everything that she wanted, because again, she's representing the president. And I was able to teach a class last year on poetry, and we looked at her poem, we dissected it, and a lot of the students said, oh, I didn't really think much about the poem, I just kind of was like, oh, good for her. I didn't realize that there is so much in here that she's sort of saying and not saying at the same time, and only some people are going to pick up on it to speak about audience. And maybe that's something we'll talk about as well. Black writers are always writing for Black people, but there's like another message that others can get. They're just going to miss the real message sometimes. And I feel like Gorman did that as well. So it was very important for me, when I was asked to write the CNN article, to stand in support of her, because of course there were people saying bad things about her, as usual, as we know. As Black people, there's always going to be someone coming out to say that you're not worthy, that your work is not good enough, et cetera, et cetera. But it was very important for me to stand with her. And she doesn't know who I am at all, but I just wanted whoever knows me to know I'm with her. She did an amazing job, and she's standing up for poetry. She's standing up for Black people, and she's showing us that these words really do matter. They matter so much that they could be on an inaugural stage. It's not just
Right.
a little hobby in a corner. This is something huge. It's something real.
Not a little hobby in the corner. I love that. And you are absolutely correct about it. I was taken back with everything that was happening to the country. It felt like
Mhm.
seeing her standing there, it was a healing moment in many
Yeah.
ways.
Mhm.
It really made me proud. It made me proud to see a young African American woman who was so profound. And I loved everything about it. I don't know who selected her, but it was the right move. I mean, everything was right about the moment. The dress, the attire, everything was right about that. And I must admit, when I saw you, of course, I thought of her because I feel like to see so many young women who are being so vocal.
Mhm.
Writing is therapeutic for many of us. I do these interviews all the time, and I am amazed at how African American, especially women, are using the written word to heal themselves of so
Yeah.
much pain and so many things that they've gone through. I'm, pro counseling, go to counseling, but I can tell you this: the pen is healing a lot of
Yes.
people. And when I saw her, I felt like could heal. She was in a process of healing, helping us as a country to heal. And when I see you representing a state like Alabama with the history that we've had, I feel like you are in a position also to heal. And I know that that is exactly what you're going to do. Something you said, though, I wanted to ask you about, and that is making those adjustments to your work in order to speak to a broader audience.
Mhm.
How do you feel about that as a writer? Would you do it, or do you feel that it's a compromise that you would never make?
Well, I first of all never say never. You never know
Mhm.
what you're going to have to do or what you're going to want to do in life. I always used to say I'm never going to hold a government office, and here I am about to be appointed, by the governor to hold this poetic office. Um, I, as far as audience goes, something that I've learned, and I think I learned it best from those writers who I admire, is that if you just write authentically
Mhm.
and write for whatever audience it is that you intend to write for. I mean, I wish Toni Morrison were here to just say this much better than I'm about to say it. But if you write for the audience that you want to speak to, it doesn't really matter, who else reads it. They'll get what they need to get. And if they don't get the very thing you're trying to say, that's because it wasn't meant for them anyway. You know what I mean? Like with a lot of my pieces, I'm writing very specifically to Black women. Let's be frank, a lot of my poems, I'm just writing them either to me or to other people like me. And others can, of course, access it. They can walk into the piece, they can get something out of it. But because I'm very focused on who it is I'm writing for, I feel like I'm never really compromising. Even
Mhm.
if someone has asked me to write, for example, there's a poem in this new book called I Cannot Talk About the South Without Talking About Black Women. And that poem was actually commissioned by Garden and Gun magazine, which
Mhm.
I never in a million years thought would ask me to write anything, okay, at all, because I'm very, very pro-black and not, a Tea Party kind of Southern woman. Um,
Mhm.
and when they asked me, it was for this book called Southern Women, and in that book there's essays and biographies of women from the South, and they asked me to write a poem to open the book, and the poem was supposed to address the question, what does it mean to be a Southern woman? And
Mhm.
so I said, well, I'm going to write about Black women. I hope that's all right, because that's the answer to this question for me. And they said, yes, please go ahead. We love your work. Go for it. And so, because I already knew I was going to commit to my audience and my perspective and my authentic experience, even though I was writing for a magazine, which again, I never thought I would ever be associated with, I think it's still, the poem served its purpose. It reached the people who I wanted it to reach. When I read that poem to Black people, I mean, I just read it the other night, and some Black women were like, oh my gosh, they felt it. But
Mhm.
the other people who read it too, they do get something. They learn something, or it makes them pause and sort of think, wait a minute, I have not considered other people's experiences at all. So yeah, so I guess what I mean is I don't think it's really ever a compromise unless someone literally rips apart your poem and says, say these words exactly that I've written for you to say. I don't think it's really a compromise at all.
Great answer. We've got a couple of questions coming in before we get to your reading. I can't believe we've already talked for 50 minutes. It's just
Oh
like
my
the
gosh.
time is, I know, right? The time is going by. I'm going to just go down the list. Someone said I live in Metro Detroit, but moved to Montgomery my sophomore year of high school, and I lived with my father. I must say it was quite an experience. Someone else says, are there any poets from Birmingham that inspire you?
Yes. Well, of course, there's the poets who are writing right now who really are inspiring to me. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Koya Maples, who lives in Birmingham. She has a book called Mend, which is about the birth of gynecology. It actually was born in Alabama, and there were experiments done on enslaved women. Very horrible history, but she writes so beautifully about the topic. Who else is here right now in Birmingham? I'm going to expand it to Alabama in general, and talk about Jacqueline Trimble in Montgomery. She has a book called American Happiness, which explores a lot of the themes that I explore. It's about being Black and being in America and kind of wrestling with what that means. But I also want to acknowledge Sister Sonia Sanchez, who is from Birmingham. Of course, she's known around the whole world because she's just an amazing, freedom fighting, just groundbreaking human, amazing person, who I have been very fortunate to meet and talk to, and she remembers my name, and I'm very grateful to her for that. But she is someone who inspires me so much. What she did for us as Black people is incredible. I mean, she put her career on the line, her life on the line to, for one, establish Black studies as a viable, course of study, but also just to be so radical as a woman, and the tiniest woman in the world. She could fit in the palm of your hand. She's just this small. But to be so radical and unapologetic, and to just speak up for us for so many decades, that really shows me, she did a lot of hard work. If you go back even further, Harriet Tubman did the hard work. Harriet Jacobs did the hard work, Sojourner Truth, Sonia Sanchez, Lucille Clifton, Nikki Giovanni, they did the work. So if all I have to do is write some poems that maybe make you a little uncomfortable, I'm good. I can do that. She did the hard work. Because of her, I can be employed as a teacher and be a political poet, out loud, and not necessarily fear for my job, not necessarily, because of her and what she did, her sacrifices. So yeah, that's a Birmingham poet.
There are a couple questions, but I wanted to stop and ask you something. Were there any voices in the room that were against you becoming the poet laureate because of the topics that you tackle? You don't have to tell me who. I'm just saying, were there people who did not want to see you get this position?
Not that I know of. To my knowledge, it was a unanimous vote both times.
Excellent.
At the nominee process or stage, and at the vote, it was unanimous as well.
Excellent, excellent. Some of the other comments, some of them aren't questions, but one person said, I recently wrote and published my first book, but I have never tried my hand in poetry. So we do want to say to you, try your hand at poetry. Yes. Go for it. One other person said, Amanda made me proud during the inauguration. I absolutely loved her presentation. What an amazing opportunity. Her words were spot on, and we totally agree. And someone did correct me to say they think that Jill Biden selected her to read, and that is excellent. Jill Biden, Dr. Biden is a teacher, and I love what she brings to the First Lady stand. It is just it's remarkable. The last comment here is, writing my book was healing for some things that I was going through. The pen can definitely help you heal. And that is very true. And so that's exactly what we were just talking about, was just the power of the pen. And with that said, we want to take a quick, just talk a little bit about your books. And you have, your last book is Reparations Now. I think it was released in September.
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And it is your third poetry collection. It is traditionally published. We always like to talk a little bit about how did you get published, but before we get to that, we would love to hear one of your poems and then talk to us about what inspired it. and then we'll wrap up by talking about your marketing and your publication. How did you get published, and the marketing of your book?
Mm-hmm.
And anyone out there, if you still have any questions, you have some time, you better drop those questions for Ashley. She has been just remarkable doing this interview. So thank you so much. But we're going to give you the full screen so that you can read one of your works.
All right. Well, I will read a piece from Reparations Now, which is out from Hub City Press. Came out yesterday. This poem is called Manifest Destiny, and it tells the story of America. And so he learned that the land could be called a name, so he called it mine. And so he learned it could be bordered with blood, and so he called it conquest. And he learned that the land was willing to give fruit and flower, and he called it profit. And so he saw some other folk planting and praising, and he called them enemy. And so he saw there were armies to guard those flowering folk, and he called them prey. And so he saw the ocean, and what was it but a highway to make more borders? And so he saw the bright and peaceful sea, and he littered it with trade. The bodies stacked next to the crops, the textiles, and the rot of disease. And so he ground hope and God into dust and called it rights. And so he heard the wind blowing joy over its people, and he sliced it up with law. And so he kept slicing for 500 years. And so he built his things around him. And so his coffers never emptied. And so he took wives and made children. And so he gave them too a price. And so he saw each blade of grass and counted it as currency. And so his blood was transfused with gold. And so he built a wall around himself to keep his many riches in, the walls encased with bone, even his heart, a fortress of muscle and money. Listen now, your past and future generations. Your hoarded hall will spoil where you stand. And that's that poem.
Thank you so much for sharing it. That was beautiful. Now talk to us about the poem itself.
So this poem, interestingly enough, began in a text thread. I have a lot of poet friends, and so we have this little, group chat. And this was around the time that the vaccine rollout was happening. So it's a pretty recent poem, one of the last ones that I wrote for the book. And I was just kind of looking around, seeing where the vaccines were. And I'm a high school teacher, so I was really trying to get mine, because I was in person because of Alabama. And I saw that there was some discrepancy in who was able to have access to these vaccines. And then, of course, I saw people like driving hours out of their way to get a vaccine. And I thought, well, what about the people who live there? Don't they need them? Like, why are people going? You see what I'm saying? Like, I just saw that there was some discrepancy there. And I was so mad because I could not get an appointment in Birmingham at all. But I'm seeing people over the mountain getting appointments. You know how it goes if you're from Birmingham, but you already know. So I went to this text thread angrily, just like, oh, I'm so annoyed, and my friends were, kind of like, we know we're annoyed too. They live in different places. And I said, this is how it's always been. This is how, the white patriarchy was set up. Everything is like this. And at some point I wrote the last two lines of that poem in the text thread. And my friend said, that sounds like a poem. And I said, it kind of does. Should I write a poem? And they said, you should write it. So I said, hold, please. And then I went and wrote the poem in that same moment. So it stemmed from the vaccine. And, I was able to sort of think through my frustration with all of colonialism from the very beginning, just from that little couplet that I put in the text thread.
Oh, I love that. I love how writing is so inspired by things that other people may not even see. Like I wrote a poem the other day while driving home after being evacuated from New Orleans because of Hurricane Ida. I had to spend a week with my in-laws and then another week in another couple of days somewhere else. My husband is in the car before me. I'm behind him. We've got our cat. All this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm driving and I'm looking at the sky and I'm thinking about this idea of being imperfect. And I started thinking about the sky and how God is able to use the sky, which is very imperfect. I mean, even, to show perfection to us. It is such an imperfect thing. It has clouds in it that get dark and turn to storms that become hurricanes that run people out of their homes. All these things are happening. And I'm sitting there and I'm so inspired and I start to kind of record myself. And so I love that you are able to find such literary art in even the hard things that are happening to us in this country. Because I know COVID is going to inspire so much work.
Yeah.
And in 20, 30 years, our kids or grandkids will be reading about this period. And because of our ability to write and publish our work without having to go through, you could put that on your blog. You put it in your book, but there's so many ways you could have shared that with the world because of technology. You could have put it on medium.com. You could have put it on your Facebook page. Because of this free flowing of information now, it's going to be beautiful to see how all of us who consider ourselves to be creatives, how we have taken this experience through the pandemic, through the death of George Floyd, through Donald Trump's term, all these things that have been hard for us, and how we have been able to use it to craft works of art that will be read for generations and generations. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Show us your book. I would love to see it. Let everybody know. So what we do on this page. We believe in supporting our writers. So please go out and get Reparations Now. I would love to bring you back at some point to just talk about reparations, because that's a whole nother conversation, right? But I would like to make sure that everyone on the page get an opportunity to learn more about your publishing process. And we would love to bring you back at some point. We host writing workshops. We host virtual book fairs. We have a monthly roundtable. We have so many different activities around the Black Writers Workspace, and we welcome you. We welcome you to be a part of everything that we're doing. But talk to us about your book publishing. I know you've got 3 of them, and there's just people who just love to know how you're publishing and how you're marketing your books.
Yes, so I am officially published for all my books that I had to and usually what they.
Hey Ashley, Ashley, can you hear me?
Yes.
You began to go out on us. I think we lost your signal. There you go. You're coming in a little bit better now. Okay. Like I said, it's technology. It's always something. Can you talk to me?
It is.
There you go.
Can you hear me now? Am I here?
Yes.
Okay, good. It almost made it the whole way through, almost. So I'm traditionally published for all 3 of my books because I had aspirations to go into academia, and that space is still very rooted in traditional publishing. And also it takes a lot of work, from what I understand, to do it on your own. And I mean, it takes a lot of work to do it this way too, but I wanted to offload some of that work to somebody else through traditional publishing. So what I did when I was about to graduate school, I submitted my master's thesis to several book contests. For poets, we don't really go through the agent process. I mean, it's kind of changing a little bit now. But traditionally, we submit to publication contests that publishing houses host. So I submitted to about 10 contests, which can get a little costly. Honestly, I was still in grad school, so I was using the government's money to do that submitting the first time around. And I was a finalist for 3 of the contests that I submitted to. I didn't end up winning any of them, but Hub City Press, one of the contests for which I was a finalist, they asked to publish my book anyway, even though I did not win the contest. So that's how I got my first book contract with them. I was able to sell my book there. And then for my second book, I did the same process, submitting to contests. and I won the Lena-Miles Wever Todd Prize from Pleiades Press. So my second book, maybe I should hold them all up. This is my first, Magic City Gospel. This is my reading copy, so it's a little ugly. Your copy will be beautiful and not shiny. I have it wrapped in packing tape because they got so beat up on the road. And then this is my second book, Dark Thing. Also got the packing tape on it. Yours will be beautiful. And this is, of course, Reparations Now. It's new, so it still looks like yours will look. I haven't had a chance to beat this one up yet. But I won the contest for Pleiades for this second one. So I, went through their marketing process of, oh, here's the winner and all of that fanfare. For the first book, actually, there was still a lot of press. And I think it's because the same year that I submitted to the contest, I won the Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award. At the time, they were still doing individual awards. So I was one of the 6 women from across the nation who received the $30,000 award. And so there was a lot of press there. And I think the book kind of could ride that. But I also was very determined to make my book, go somewhere. So I was constantly, posting and just trying to spread my wings there as well. For the third book, I knew I didn't really want to go through contests again because it's so costly and time consuming. So I queried presses and I ended up back at Hub City Press, which I'm very, very happy about. And for each book, too, there was a process to get to that stage to send it to those contests. A professor of mine told me that she tries to get 30% of her poems published in journals before she submits to a manuscript competition. And I think that's fantastic advice. I've used it for all of my books. And actually in all of my books, it's way more than 30% for me. Most of my poems in the books are in journals. And what you do that for is just to sort of get your name out there, build momentum, get editors interested. And if some of those editors, love your work, they could end up suggesting to you, hey, maybe you should talk to this person, or they may be looking for someone's book to publish and they see your work and want to work with you on it. So really anything helps. Getting your name out in any way before going for the book is a good idea.
Wow, you just gave a great deal of information. Thank you so much for that. I know a lot of people just learned a lot. I know I did. Thank you so much. Ashley, you have been amazing to talk to. Congratulations again. Continue to be great. Continue to do what you're doing. Don't give up. Just keep writing. I am so impressed with all the things that you've accomplished. Like I said, there are so many young African-American, just young girls, period, of all races that will be inspired by your story, by all the things that you've accomplished. So just continue to do what you're doing. And thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I am going to take you off the screen to say farewell to our viewers, but I would love to give you a formal farewell as well. So if you can hold on for me. Is there anything that you would like to leave with our writers and our avid readers that are watching tonight?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me. And I just would love to encourage everyone to just believe in their own voice. This is a world that really tries to steal that from us at every turn. So just believe in yourself, as cliche as it might sound. And maybe if you know that song from The Wiz, sing that to yourself. I do that sometimes, but it really does work. Believe in yourself and everything is going to work out just fine.
You are an old soul to bring up The Wiz. I love that. Absolutely. Thank you again. And just hold on. I want to give you a form of farewell. Take care.
All right.
So everyone, just thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Ashley is amazing. I mean, look at all the things that she's accomplished. And for those of you who are out there publishing your books and looking to get into poetry, she's given such an amazing amount of information to help you in order to do that. The passion, the skill, the flow of words, the commitment to words and to advocacy is what it seems to be driving her success. And I know that many of you have all those things to give as well. So thank you so much. Tomorrow night, I will have 3 people on the screen. We will talk with Makeen Yassar, who is the winner of the Chapter 1 Writing Competition, Poetry Competition. So we talk about poetry again. We will also talk to Yasmin Ben, who is a 3 times published author in health and wellness, expert and tarot reader. Maybe she will read tarot cards for me. And we will also talk to Etheline Sewer, who is with Speak Right Play. So please join us tomorrow starting at 4:30. We have a 4:30, 5:30, and 6:30 interview. So we will have this on Facebook for a while. It will be on YouTube, and we will also be adding clips to Instagram. And you can also view this interview or listen to this interview on our podcast on Spotify or on anchor.fm. Take care.